Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. So in this video we'll be looking at our recipe app. In the last video I showcased a recipe app that we'll be working on, and in this video we are diving into implementing everything that I showed in the last video. If you haven't watched the last video, it should be popping up around somewhere here, and I'll also leave a link in the description to that particular video. And in case you missed the previous video, this is a screenshot of what we'll be building. So over here I have a simple Flutter app, and as we can see on our right side, there isn't much going on, just a default counter app. So this is where we'll be starting from to build something like this. Right now we are going to work extensively with Riverpod. That doesn't mean you have to know all the ins and outs of Riverpod to follow this course. You just need to know the basis of that and Flutter, right? And we'll be learning everything from scratch as we move on. Because of that, I would like us to set up Riverpod, which is the first thing that I'll be doing. So just move to your browser, and this is my browser, and search for Riverpod. So Riverpod, and you can just enter everything here. Just click on the first link. That's going to take you to riverpod.dev, and then click on get started. Right, and this is going to take you directly to the docs. Now from here, what you are looking for is how to set up Riverpod. So when you scroll down a bit, we have installing the package, and this is what we are looking for. Right, for Flutter, if you want to use Riverpod, this is what you need. So we are going to copy everything that is here, right, and then come back to our project. We're going to open the terminal and then paste everything we copied. So I'm going to paste this and then hit submit, enter, and this is going to install all the dependencies we copied. Right, so as you can see, this is installing the dependencies one after the other. While it installs, we scroll down a bit and then look for the next option. So there is a manual way of doing it. You can add a dependency directly, but we've already copied and then installed from the terminal, so we don't need to do the next step. And when we come here, the next section talks about enabling Riverpod lints or custom lints. So what we have to do is that we need to add analysis options YAML to our project, and then we need to copy and paste these files. So if we come back to our project and the installation is done, so we can close our terminal, we need to come here and then add analysis options.yaml, and this has already even been added for us. So what we need to do is that we need to paste this content here. So I'm going to just remove everything here and then paste this. Hopefully that should work. Now to see warning, we can run this, so we can follow everything by running, copying, and then running this. So I'm going to just run this in the terminal, and it comes out that we are missing something. So an error is shown, which is Flutter application should have a provider scope widget at the top of the widget tree. So in order to use Riverpod, we must wrap our entire app in a widget called provider scope. And if you scroll down a bit, we are going to see that over here in the docs, we have provider scope wrapped around our entire app. Right, so that's basically what you have to do. Come to main.dat, look for your app, so run app, my app, and then you can wrap everything in provider scope. So I'm going to choose wrap with widget and then choose provider scope. Riverpod is set up correctly, so we can use Riverpod from now on. The next thing we are going to look at is installing other dependencies that we will need for this project. So the first dependency we'll be installing is the Google font dependency, because we are not going to use the default fonts that Flutter comes with on Android or iOS. If you just scroll down under the dependencies section in your pubspec.yaml, scroll down a bit where you will find Flutter Riverpod, Riverpod annotation, and let's add the Google font package. So Google Fonts, and make sure you are adding the latest version. So this autocomplete should help me here. If you don't have autocomplete in VS Code or Android Studio, you can simply go to pub.dev and then search for the package you want. So Google Fonts. This should give you the package name as well as the version number, and then you just click on copy and make sure you paste it directly under the list of packages here. So in YAML, indentation really matters. So if you get any error over here, it should probably be around indentation. Now after Google Fonts, the next package we'll be looking at is called Dio. So Dio, if you've heard HTTP before, it's an alternative to the HTTP package, right? So we'll be making requests to an endpoint to get the recipes and everything that we need to build this app. In order to make those requests, we need a library to help us. So you can either use the HTTP library or the Dio library. I prefer to go with Dio, so I'm just going to install the latest version of Dio. And once again, you can come here and search for the package. So Dio, get the correct version and then paste it here. Now after Dio, we'll be working with images a lot. So if I show you the screenshot we have over here, realize we have a lot of images, and in order to work with images effectively in Flutter, we can use a package called cache network image. So what that will do is that it's going to cache our network image, and that is going to help with performance. So our app wouldn't always be fetching the images, right? So we are going to type in cached network image, and I'm going to add the latest version. So just hitting enter is going to install this. The next thing we will need is also called URL launcher. Now if you watch the other video, you realize that we can click on any recipe to get a video on how that recipe is prepared. So in order to navigate to YouTube, we will have a link with a recipe, and when the user clicks on that link, we are going to open or launch that particular URL. So in Flutter, an easier way to launch URLs or open URLs is to use the URL launcher package. So we are going to also add the URL launcher. So URL launcher like right, and I'm going to add the latest version. And the next package we will be using is called get storage. So if you've used shared preferences in the past, you can add shared preferences in place of get storage, but it's basically a key value local storage. So if you come to pub and search get storage, this is what we'll be adding, right? You can copy directly from here and then add it. So get storage allows us to store data, like simple data, so text, map, string, what have you, like any data that you would like to store locally. And we'll be storing the recipe the user saves as favorites locally. So we will need something like shared preferences or get storage to do this. So over here, I'm just going to add a get storage that I copied. Now the last package we would be adding is an icon package. So I don't like the default icon material comes with, especially for this particular package. So there is a package over here which is icon sacks, and I'm looking for the plus version, so this particular version, and I'm going to copy this, right, and then paste it here. After that, I'm going to run pub-get, or you can just open your terminal and type flutter pub-get, and that should make sure that all our packages are installed. Now since we have all our packages installed, we would hardly come to pubspec.yaml if not to add an image or maybe one or two things. So the next thing we are going to work on is our app, right, after installing the packages. So I'm going to close pubspec.yaml as well as analysisoptions.yaml. Now our app is really simple. We are just using the default homepage that comes with a new Flutter app, but we are going to delete this and then start working on our own version of the app. Now before we do anything, I want us to analyze the system we are going to build so that we know how to structure our app accordingly. So if we look at the app we are going to work on, which is the recipe app, it has two main functionalities: the ability to view recipes, which is what we see over here, and the ability to add recipes as favorites. So those are the two main functionalities we have. If you look at this bottle tab we have over here, there is home and then there is favorites. Right, so those are the two main things you'll be focusing on. We are going to structure our folders according to the features we have. So in the lib directory, I am going to create a new folder called features, and within this folder I'm going to create something called recipe, maybe recipes, anyhow you decide to call it, and I'm going to create another one called favorites. Right, so these are the two main features we have. I'm also going to create a file over here. So within the lib, which I'm going to call root app. So this is basically the first page the user is going to see, like the home page, right? But I've decided to call that one the root app. You can call it anything you want. And these two different tabs are going to be home and then favorites. So the page that holds the tabs and then everything is going to be the root app. This is going to be a simple stateful widget, so root app. And we are going to return an empty scaffold. So scaffold like this, and we have to make sure we move the const as well as import. So let's render this root app page in our main.dat file. So in the main.dat file, what we are going to do is that we are going to clean the default home page. So I'm going to remove all this and then set the home widget as the root app widget we just created. So root app, right? And then this is going to render a white screen, which means we are displaying this empty scaffold over here. Let's remove the debug banner over here. So in order to do that, there is a property within the material app called debug show checked mode banner, and we can set that as false, and that is going to take care of the banner. The next thing I want us to do is to create the pages we'll be working with. So we'll be working with two main pages. We have the home page, which is the recipes page, and then we also have the favorites page, and we'll use these two pages to build our bottom navigation bar. So over here under favorites, let's create a directory called pages, and the first file within this directory is going to be the favorite page. Right, for now we are going to make this a simple stateless widget just to preview it. So favorite page, and I'm going to return a scaffold, and make sure that I'm importing this from material, and I want us to have a text over here. So we can have an app bar, and we make sure we move const, so app bar with a title and a text that says favorites, right? We just want to have a text there. We're going to copy this thing we have over here, come to the recipes, create a directory called pages, and within this directory we are going to create our recipe page, which is the home page, the first page on our app. So I'm going to call it recipes page, and then paste the favorite page I copied. We will just change the name. So instead of favorites, we can change it to recipes page, and then make sure we import everything from material, and also change the text to recipes. Right, so basically we have two pages over here, favorites and then recipes page. Now back to the root app, we can show these two pages based on the current index of our bottom navigation bar. So if home is active, then we show the recipe page. If favorite is active, then we show the favorite page. So I'm very sure that you've built a bottom navigation bar before, but if you haven't built any, you don't have to worry. So in order to create a bottom navigation bar, we first need to use the bottom navigation bar property in the scaffold, which allows us to pass a widget. And the widget we are going to use is called navigation bar. This navigation bar requires something we call destinations. So if you've used bottom navigation bar before, which is another widget in Flutter, you would realize that it takes items instead of destinations. So this is basically like items. So what we're going to do is that we're going to provide it a list of navigation destinations, and this navigation destinations will have two of them. So we have one for recipes, or you can call it home, and then we have one for the favorites. So when we save, we should see something like this show up on our screen. Now when we click on it, it doesn't do anything, right? So the first thing we like to do is to change the icons. So instead of icons.home, we are going to use the icon package we just added, which is icon sacks. So icon sacks, and I'm looking for plus, so icon sack plus, that's the name of the package. Icon sacks, and I'm not getting an autocomplete, so I might have to write it myself, .home. And let's import this package. So import package icon sacks plus, like this, and we are looking for the home version, and I can also set this to home. So we are going to get this icon. Now for the favorites, we are going to use icon sacks plus, the same icon over here, and then set it to bookmark, and that is going to give us this icon over here. You can use any icon you want. I just prefer to go with these two. When the home is active, if you're on the home page, I want us to change the icons to the bold version. So we can do that using the selected icon property. So when this icon is active, we want to use instead of linear, we rather want to use bold. So bold, there is a bold version for all the icons, and then we realize that it becomes a filled or bold version. Now for the bookmark, we would also like to do the same. So when the bookmark icon is active, or the favorite icon is active, which is we're on the bookmark page, we would like to use the bold version of the bookmark icon. For now, we are not on the bookmark page, so we are using the linear or the light version of this icon. So we first need to have the pages that we'll be navigating to. For now, we just have the navigation destination or the bottom navigation items, but they don't represent any page. As we can see, we are not seeing our favorite page or home page, which is the recipes page. So in order to navigate between these two pages, I'm first going to create a variable to indicate the page we are currently on, and I'm going to call that current index and set it to 0. Right, so that means by default we are on the first page. I'm going to supply this current index to the navigation bar as a field called selected index. Now whenever a user clicks on the bottom navigation bar, I want to change the current index. So on destination selected, that is what we are looking for. We want to set state, which means we want to trigger a rebuild, and then set the current index to the new index the user has tapped on. So when we do this, and currently if we click, we realize that the home changes to favorites, right? The active changes from home to favorites. Nothing is happening because we are not really using this value, which is the current index, to change the page we are showing. So in order to do that, we must have a list of pages that we would like to show, and I'm going to create a variable to hold that. So final pages, which is going to be the name of my variable, and that is going to be the recipes page and then the favorite page, like this. So within the body of my scaffold, I would like to render one of these pages based on which bottom navigation bar is active. So I can just simply do body and then pages current index. What this means is that based on this index, we are selecting the page, one of these pages, and then displaying them in the body. Now when we save this, we see favorites over here, and if we move to home, we see it changing to home because the current index is picking one of these pages based on its value, right? So that's it for our navigation. The next thing I would like us to work on is our theming. So at the moment we are using the default font, and we are also using the default theme from Flutter. So in order to change the font, let's go to our main.dat file, and under the theme, I would like us to change our text theme to a Google font text theme. So over here, we can change our text theme and set the value to Google font, and we have to make sure that you've added a Google font package and Google font, so I don't have autocomplete here. And I'm looking for Google font.open sans text theme. So this is a text theme I want to use for this particular project. In other words, this is the font I want to use. It's called Open Sans. So when I save, you realize that our font changes, right? At first these were bold, but now they look a little bit lighter because of how Open Sans looks like. Right now, just doing this is enough to change the font, but we will come back and do more customization when it comes to the font. While we are here, one thing I would like us to also change is the color we are using for the app. So at the moment, we are using this deep purple color, but I would want us to use a green color. If you like the deep purple or any different color, you are good to stick with it, right? So for me, I'm going to change this to colors.green, and that's the color I want to use. And immediately I do that, realize that our background turns a little bit like green, which is not something we really want. So we would like to also change the scaffold background color while we are here, which is the background color for the body, right? So scaffold background color, and I would just like to set it to a lighter shade of gray. So color.colors.gray.shade 50. So this is going to be our background color. So with this done, let's get started working on our home page, which is the favorite page. So I'll close all these, go to the favorite page. So this is the page we will start working on. And before we start writing any codes or with just specific codes, I would like us to analyze the page we are going to build so that we will know exactly how we are supposed to approach this design. So if I come back here, this is where I have the UI, and I would like us to look at how the design is structured and how we can structure our codes as well. So if we look at this side of the UI, we can consider the top part as our app bar. So this can be an app bar, and then we have some kind of title. So this is going to be a title that's probably in a column. Now, apart from that, everything else here can be considered as a widget within the body of that particular page. So we will have our search bar here, which is the next thing after the app bar. We will have a text that says categories. Then we will have a horizontally scrollable view, which is going to hold this list of cards, which is categories. We will have a row that is going to hold the recommended for you and then the see more button. So we can consider this portion as a row with a text and then a button. This portion will also be something like a list view that scrolls horizontally, right, with some cards. So all our cards look identical. Because of that, we'll be styling them, using our theme. We also have the same thing over here. So we have a row which has a text and then a button, and below this is a grid. So we have 2-column grid over here which has cards, right? So below this is a grid. So we have a 2-column grid over here which are all within this body, this big body, right? So basically that is going to be the structure. We first have an app bar and then we have the widgets that follow. So within the recipes page, we have our app bar already defined over here. So the title within the app bar is called recipes, and I would like us to change that to a column. So instead of just having a text as a title which just appears over here as recipes, I would want us to use a column because we want to put 2 texts there. So a column with children, and then the first child is going to be the text that says hi Jaron or whatever the username is. So I'm going to put a text here that says maybe hi Jaron, and I'm also going to put another text here that says got a tasty dish in mind. So got a tasty dish in mind. Now this is how it looks like, right? The first thing we want to do is that we want all our text, which is title within the app bar, to be left centered. And in order to do that, there is a property within the app bar which is called center title, and we can set that to false. On Android it is false by default, but on iOS it is true. So if you're on iOS, you see that your column is in the middle, and in order to push it to the left, you need to set the center title field false. That still doesn't do anything on Android because this column, which we've used as a title, is centering the children by default. In order to override that, we need to use the cross-axis alignment property. On the cross-axis, we want it to align the children to the start. So when we do this, realize that the high gel moves to the left of the got a tasty dish in mind, and that's going to fix the issue for us. The next thing we have to deal with is the font sizes. So if you look at the design, realize that the text looks a bit smaller and then they look nice. So I'm going to change the style for this particular text. So I can do style, and then I can pass in a text style over here, right, and do something like maybe font size maybe 14, and that will be small, right? That will make it small. I can also style this and then provide a separate font size, but then the UI wouldn't really be consistent. Font sizes would be very, very different because I would have to repeat myself each time I want a particular font size. So a better way we can do this is to use the text theme within our app. So in order to access the text theme, let's create a variable over here called theme, and then set it to theme.offContext. Instead of passing text style like this, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to say theme.texttheme. So I'm accessing the text theme defined by Flutter default, and I want to use the body medium or body large text theme. So when I set it to body large, it sets it to a particular font size and then font weight. Because there's a property I can access anywhere in my app, I know that it's going to be very consistent. If I use body large elsewhere in the app, I don't have to remember the exact font weight or font style. And I can also change this at the theme level. I want us to add the emoji over here. I'm just going to copy this. And when it comes to our next text, we are going to use the title large text style. If we apply this text style with the style property, so theme.texttheme.title large, we will see no change. This is because the default text style used by the title property in the app bar is the title large text style. So we are basically making no change. But then we can copy whatever properties the title large text style has and modify some of them using the copy with method. So we are copying everything and we want to change only the font size to 19. Right. Also, we can change the font weight to maybe font weight 500, but this is not going to work at the moment and we will look at it later. The only issue we will encounter in the future is that we'll be using this title large text style a lot, and we will need more or less the same kind of override, setting font size to 19 and font weight to maybe 500. So instead of modifying the title large text style everywhere we need it, we can customize it once and for all in our theme, knowing that wherever we use title large in our app, we want the font size to be 19 and want the font weight to be 500. So if you look at the design we are working on, this category over here is a title large text style. Recommended for you as well is title large. This as well is title large. And we want to maintain the same consistency. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to clear this style and then come to my main.dat file. Now within this main.dat file, we have a text theme over here. So that is pointing to Google font.open sans text theme, which is the font I'm using. You can use a different font if you like. So I'm going to copy whatever is in this text theme. So copy with, and then modify the title large text style. So for the title large, I still want it to be Google font.open sans. This is just a text style. When you do text theme, you are getting the text theme from Open Sans. But if you just do Open Sans like this without a text theme, you are talking of text style. So Open Sans, and what I want specifically is that I want the font size for this title large to be 19, and then the font weight to be font weight, not bold, but then with 500. When I save, we get this text style with a font size of 19. That is going to be it for our app bar. We will come back to this app bar to remove the background we see over here, but that will be at a later time. So let's continue with our design. The next thing we want to look at is this search bar on our home page. So in order to create this search bar, we are going to use the search anchor widget, and this is how it looks like. So over here within our scaffold, I'm going to collapse this app bar and then come to the body. Now the body is going to be a list view because everything in the body will be scrollable with some children. Now let's map out whatever we are going to have within this body. So we are first going to have our search bar, and this search bar. Then we are going to have our categories. So maybe recipe categories, and next we are going to have recommended for you. So recommended for you section, and then we are going to lastly have recipes of the week section. So recipes of the week section. Right. So this is how our home page will look like, and these will be different sets of widgets because we don't want to put everything within the children. Right. Now let's create a widget specifically for the search bar and render it here. In the features directory under recipes, I'm going to create a new directory over here called widgets. So the directory is going to be called widgets, and within this widgets we are going to have a file that represents our search bar. So I'm going to call it recipe search bar. So this can be a simple stateless widget to start with, but later on we will convert this so that we can use some Riverpod feature here. So maybe a stateless widget, and then we can call it recipe search bar, and for now we can return maybe a text that says search bar, just for now. Right. Now under this comment, I'm going to render the recipes search bar. Now we can see the search bar over here. I want this list view to have some kind of padding. At the moment the search bar is just touching the edge of the screen. There is no padding in this list view. So we can set a padding over here and edge insert.all, give it a value of 16, and that should look good, right? So we now have some space all around this list view. Now let's get to our recipe search bar and start working on this search bar. The first thing we want to do is that we want to use the right widget for this search bar, and the widget we are going to use is called search anchor, and specifically search anchor.bar. So instead of returning just a text over here, I'm going to return search anchor.bar, and this requires us to provide something called suggestions builder, right? So suggestions builder is a function or a method that returns the suggestion you want to display when the user searches for something. For now, I'm going to just return an empty list. Supposed to be a function that returns something, so I'm going to return an empty list like this. We have this search bar over here. When we click on it, it takes us to a page where we can search, right? But this is not all that we want. Now let's look at how we can design this default search anchor bar to look like what we have in the UI. So the first thing we are looking at is the placeholder there says search any recipes. So back here we can set a placeholder by using the bar hint text property, and then we are going to set that to a string that says search, maybe search for recipes instead of search for any recipe. So search for recipes, we are going to see that in our search bar. Now next we want to also change the elevation of this search bar. So we can see a lot of shadow here, and we don't want any of those shadows. So what we can do is that we can change the elevation of this search bar. So we have bar elevation, and it's not going to take a value like maybe 0 or 1. It's rather takes a widget state property. So what we're going to do is that we're going to pass in widget state property all, then we put our value there. So maybe something like 0.2, right? And that is going to remove the shadow we have over there. Now next thing is we want to also change the bar side, right, which is the border over here. We want to have some kind of a light border there. So I'm going to set bar side widget state property, or that's what I'm using, because I don't really care much about the focus, the hover state, any of the states. So I'm just going to say that when whatever state it is in, I just want to apply this style. So this is border side, and what I want to do is that I want to use the divider color for this particular border side. So when I save, I do something like this and I save, we have this black outline around the search bar, which is not what I want, right? I want to first change the width of this outline, so maybe we can set that to 1. It doesn't really change much. Maybe it's not really necessary, so we can change this to a different color. So let's say colors dot gray, not that color, and then colors dot gray dot maybe shade 300. Now the next thing I want to also change is the icon, so we can do that using the bar leading, and then set that to an icon property, and I'm going to pass in our icon sax. So icon sax plus linear dot search normal. So that's the icon I want to use, and then we are going to get this particular icon. When it comes to the background color, if you like this background color, which is like light green, then you can leave this as it is. But if you want a different background color, then you can use the bar background color property, and it also takes widget state property all, right? And I can pass in any value I want. Now the value I want for this is coming from my theme, so it's not going to be like colors.blue, colors.gray. I want to use a property from my theme, and because of that, I'm going to create a variable over here called theme and set it to theme dot of context. Right, so I can just do theme dot color scheme, and I want something called surface container lowest. This is what I'm looking for. And when I save, it's more like this white color, right? But it's coming from my theme, so if I intend to implement a dark mode, I wouldn't have to come here and then do a check to see if we are in dark mode and use a different color, or like everything is just coming from my theme. So this is going to give me the dark mode equivalent of this particular color. Next thing we would like to do is to change the background color of the page we go to when we click on this search bar. So when I click here, look at this, it takes me to this page which has this green shade color, right? And I would like us to change that as well. So let's come here and then change the bar, not bar, we are looking for view background color. So the page we go to is the view, and then the search bar is the bar. So view background color, and we can just set that to theme dot color scheme dot surface container lowest. And this time I don't need to say we just state property all. So when I save this and then we click on that, it's going to take us to a page where we have this white background, almost the same as the search. Right. Now that is going to be pretty much all for the design aspects of the search bar. Because we don't have any data yet to search, we are going to leave everything like this and then come back to it later when we start pulling the data from our API. Now the next thing we are going to look at before we start pulling some data to work with is the design for the categories, right? So we would like to have these templates down, then we can start looking at our API implementation. So I'm going to create a new widget called recipe categories, and we can also make this stateless widget to start with. So recipes categories, and we can return a text that says recipes categories. And let's render this recipes category. So recipes categories, and we need a comma here, right? So this is what we have. Now I want us to have some kind of space between this recipes category and then text. So there are a lot of ways we can do it. We can wrap this particular widget in a padding. We can put a sizer box here. We can even go inside here and then wrap the search anchor.bar with a padding widget. There are so many ways you can create gaps in Flutter. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to wrap or put a sizer box here with a height of 20, and you can choose to use padding, it doesn't really matter. So that's going to create a gap between this widget and this widget. Now before we display the actual recipe categories, right, I would want us to put a text here like this that says categories before the actual categories, and I don't want to put that within the widget. You can of course put it here, but I just want to put it at the top here so that this will just be a horizontal scrollable list instead of maybe a column that has a text and then a horizontal scrollable list, right? So I'm going to put a text here and then say categories. Now I want to style this text, and I want to use our text theme title large text style. So this is what we have for the categories. Now we can finally display the categories, and again we need some kind of space, so you can either wrap this in a padding widget, or maybe wrap the widgets here in a padding widget, or put a sizer box here. It's just up to you on which way you decide to space these widgets out. So I can put a sizer box here with a height of 10. So that's going to be the space I want to give between these two text or widgets. So categories and then the actual recipe categories, there's going to be a space of 10 between them, and then we can come to the recipe categories itself, which is this thing over here, the text. Now what we want to do, if you look at this UI, it is a horizontally scrollable list of cards. In order to implement something like this, we can use a list view. So what we are going to do is that instead of returning a text like this, we are going to rather return a list view, and within this list view we are not just going to return a default list view or a normal list view. We are rather going to use a list view builder, right? So maybe list view.builder, but then we also want to space this widget out. So if you look at the UI, we can see a consistent amount of space between the widgets. And the easiest way we can do that is to use the list view.separated. So there's like a list view builder. The only difference is that it also gives us another method over here, which is separator builder, that we can use to build out a widget that separates the actual items we want to render. So if you haven't used it before, it is no big deal. Just look at what I'm doing. So within the item builder, this is the method that returns the actual widget you want to build. So I'm going to return maybe a text like category index. So text category then index. So it's going to be category 1, category 2, category 3, depending on the number of items we have. And then the separator builder is the widget you want to use to separate each element within the item builder. So in this particular case, we're going to use something like a sizer box to do the separation. So I would like to return immediately, instead of something like a divider, a sizer box, and then we can give it a width. So I'm going to give it a width of 12. And the item count, for now we can just have an item count of maybe 8. And we can't see anything, right? There is probably an error thrown in the console if you look at it. And if I look at it, yeah, of course there is an error. It talks about now constraint, blah blah blah. All that is trying to say is that we can't have a list view nested in a list view, right? By default, you can't have two scrollable list views nested in each other. We have to constrain the size of one, so that Flutter knows that this, when I'm scrolling, am I scrolling the first list view, I'm scrolling the second list view. So in order to do that, we are going to wrap this list view in a sizer box and then give it a height, any reasonable height of 100, which is how big we want this to be scrollable. So if I try scrolling this, you can see that I'm able to scroll on the vertical axis, right? And then I'm scrolling in a space of 100, which is the space I gave over here. Now we don't want to scroll vertically, we want to scroll horizontally. So in order to change that, there is a property which is scroll direction, and we can set it to axis.horizontal. So when we set this to axis.horizontal, this is going to allow us to scroll in the horizontal axis. So as you can see, I can now scroll the text in the horizontal axis. Now we don't want to just return a text that is going to be boring. What we rather want to do is we want to return a column that has a card and then a text below it. So the card has the image and then maybe the name of the image, which is the name of the category, right? So what we are going to do is that within the item builder, instead of returning just a text, we are going to return a column. Now the column has to have children, so the first child is going to be the card with image, and then the second child will be the text. Now to create a card with image, we must have the same dimension for the card. So if you look at the cards, they all have the same dimension, right? So there must be a well-defined dimension using a widget like sizer box to indicate that hey, all cards should be of width 80 and maybe height 80. So that's exactly what we are going to do. We can first have our card, but we're not going to see anything because the card doesn't have any content. In order to make this card visible, we would have to give it some kind of dimension, like card be 80 pixels in width and 80 pixels in height. So I'm going to wrap it in a sizer box and then tell this card that hey card, maybe increase your width to 80, and we are still not going to see anything, but we can optionally set the height to maybe 80 as well, and then we can see some kind of card over here, right? Because the card knows how big it should be. The only issue we have over here is that when I set this height to 80, I don't know the space left. I would have to calculate. I would have to do something like maybe 80 minus 100. So I have 20 left. So the text area should make sure that it fits within the available space, which is 20. Otherwise, it's going to cause an overflow. So if I put the text over here and it fits perfectly, right? Because 80 is like a good number, and then the text height is not above 80. It's not above 20, not 80, 20. But then this is still not a good way of doing it, because imagine I did this 90. You see, that causes an overflow, and maybe the height to 90. So I would have to hack my way around trying to figure out which value looks good. So instead of doing that, we are rather going to use another widget called expanded. So what expanded is going to do is that expanded would allow Flutter to display or lay out our text first, then give the remaining space to our card. What's happening when we use expanded is that, let's say we have a width of or a height of 100, and this is our height, the height given to us, or the height we say we want, which is 100. We don't know how big the text will be, right? Let's assume we don't know how big the text will be. So we are telling Flutter that, hey, put a text there. After laying out this text, then give the remaining space to the card. That's what it means when we use expanded. So in our case, for instance, we are going to wrap the sizer box in an expanded widget. So wrap with widget, and then we are going to choose expanded like this, and we can still see our card without a height. The reason is that we are in a column, so expanded is going to work vertically. It is expanding this card or sizer box in this case to take the available space after Flutter has laid out the text. So if the text happen to be much let's say bigger, I don't know if I can do \n text, you see it reduces, it shrinks in size because it is only taking the available space. We are prioritizing the text over the card image. If you don't want to go through this stress, you can just put play with some values and then get a working value for yourself, and that will be okay. So I'm going to move these two over here. So what we are going to do next is to style our card. So if you look at the card over here and the card we have in the design, they look different. So how do we get a card like this, right? If I zoom in, you see this card looks different. First, we are going to use card.field instead of maybe normal card. So card.field, and this takes away the elevation we had previously, the elevation that comes with default card widget. The next thing we want to do is to change the shape of this card. So we can start this card by applying the shape, and the shape I want to apply is called continuous rectangle border shape. But then I want to change the border radius of this card, and I want to give it a border radius of maybe 30. So with a border radius of 30, we end up with this nice looking design. Now from here, I can tell you that all our cards are going to have this exact shape and then border radius. So if you look at the design, all our cards have this exact shape. So we don't want to repeat this shape continuous rectangle border radius of 30. Instead, we are either going to set this at the theme level. So let's come back to our main, and within this main, we first have a text theme. Next, we can have card theme, and then we can provide a card theme like this. And what we want to change over here is the shape. So shape, and we want to set a shape of continuous rectangle border, and then apply a border radius of 30. So when we do this, this is going to apply to all our cards, and we can come back to our recipe categories and remove this shape because by default all our cards have this styling. So when I save, we still don't see anything different, and even if I change from field, we realize that even the elevated card still has the same shape. But let's revert back to the field. So within this card, this is where we are going to put our image, and we are going to use cache network image because the image you'll be displaying will come from a URL, but we don't have any data yet, right? So this is the perfect place for us to look at fetching data from the API we'll be using to build this particular app. So we are going to use the MailDB API to build this entire app. So let's head to our browser and then search for the MailDB. And this should take you to the maildb.com, or you can just Google it and then you should find the maildb.com. So from this page, we can go to the API section and find a list of endpoints that we can retrieve information about recipes. We can try one of these endpoints. So for instance, the list all mail categories endpoint, I'm going to copy everything here and then paste it in a new tab, and realize that this returns a list of what categories. We have an ID, the category name, we have the image, and then we have a description for that particular category. And if we copy any of the URL, so like this, and then paste it here, this gives us information about a mail. So we have like the name, the ID, the category, some instructions, and we even have the ingredients, right? So this API has everything that we need to build our recipe app. Now what I want us to do is to set up a base URL for this API. This API has a base URL of www.maildb.com API JSON v1/1. So this repeats for all the endpoints that we are going to use. So instead of always repeating this, what we are going to do is that we are going to set this up as the base URL. Then depending on the functionality we want, so if we want to fetch all categories, then we are going to add /categories, right? So what I'm going to do is that let's first copy this and then come back to our code. Now within the lib directory, I want to create another directory called utils, and you can call it anything you want, and then create a file called network. Now within this network file, I'm going to create a dio instance. So basically what you'll be using to fetch or make the HTTP request. So variable dio equal to just a dio, and I'm not getting any autocomplete, not sure why, so I'm going to import manually. So package dio like this. Within this we can pass something called base options, if I'm right, yeah, and then we can pass a base URL. So what that means is whenever we use this dio instance, we don't have to repeat that particular part of the URL. So we don't have to repeat the maildb.com /API/JSON/1. And I also want to convert this to HTTPS, so https:// like this, right? So there is what we have for our dio. Now we can use this to make requests to, let's say, the categories endpoint, which is what we want to do to list our categories. In order to do that, let's go to where we have our categories, and we can find that here. So recipes, widgets, categories, and this is a stateless widget. So we don't have any way of fetching data. All we have over here is just some dummy list of items, right? So we are going to convert this from a stateless widget to something that can allow us to fetch data, more specifically a Riverpod consumer widget. I don't think I have an easy way to convert to Riverpod consumer widgets. If you are on VS Code with the Riverpod extension, there should be a way to easily convert your widgets to a Riverpod consumer widget or consumer stateful widget, depending on what you want. So what I'm going to do, since I don't have an easy way to do this at the moment, is to copy our build method, because that's the most important part of this code, which I don't want to repeat. So I'm going to cut this together with the override and then create a new method, right, or a new class. So I'm going to start with consumer, so consumer widgets like this, right, and then this should allow me to fill in the name. So it was recipes categories, and then I can paste the build we copied here. But one thing is we need to also add one more thing, which is widget ref, right, and when we are using the consumer widget. Now the next thing we have to do is to fix our imports. So I'm going to fix this import here, and now when I save, nothing changes because it is almost the same as having a stateful widget. Now that we have a consumer widget, we can use Riverpod to fetch the data that we want, right? So if you are new to Riverpod, fetching data with Riverpod isn't difficult. So what we are going to do is, because our app is very small, not a very complex app, I am going to put the providers that we'll be using under a big directory called providers. Now you can put it specifically under the feature. So for instance, I can create a directory here called maybe providers, or you can call it anything you want to call it, services, it doesn't really matter, right? I'm going to create it outside in the lib directory and call it providers. Now within this provider, I'm going to create category or recipe categories categories provider. So this is going to provide us with the list of categories, right? Let's once again look at what we have for a category. So a category has an ID, something that we can call name, and then an image, right? We don't have description, or in our app we don't really use the description of the category for anything. So we are going to leave the description alone, but basically that's what a category is: an ID, a name, and then an image. So in our app there should be a way that we represent categories. When you talk of categories, what's a category? It will be much easier to have a class or some sort of a blueprint to tell us what a category. So we know that a category will always have an ID, it will always have a name, and then an image, right? Because of this, I'm also going to create another directory called entities, and again you can put this directly under the features, right? This is not a very complex app, so I wouldn't want to abstract things too much. And then let's create a file called maybe category, maybe recipe category, right? Just to stay consistent. So recipe category. Now recipe category, we can have a class called recipe category, and within this class we are going to define what a recipe is. What a category is. So a category is going to have an ID, which is a string. So if you look at it, the IDs are string, and then it's also going to have a name. We are going to call it name, so I'm going to put name here. We're also going to have an image URL, so final string image URL, right? And let's create a constructor for this recipe category. So we have a constructor like this that requires the ID, name, and image URL. Let's also add another method, which is a from map, because we would like to convert this JSON we have over here into a category model when we fetch this data from our API. So in order to do that, let's create another constructor, which is a constructor that allows us to convert a JSON into this recipe category. So in order to do that, we are going to use the factory keyword. So factory recipe category dot, maybe from JSON or from map, maybe you can call it from JSON, and then we want to return recipe category. So what this does is it's a constructor that takes some kind of data which is supposed to be of a map of string and dynamic, and then it returns a recipe category instance accessing the fields from the JSON, right? Good. So one thing that we will note over here is that in our JSON we don't have ID there, we don't have name there, we don't have image URL there. So we have to put the name we have on our JSON. So instead of having ID here, we are going to rather use ID category, because we are accessing the ID category field and then we are mapping it to our ID field in the recipe category. Again, it's called str category, so that's the name. The name is str, and from this API, whenever you see str, I think they mean string. So this is a string category thumb. I've copied it and I'm going to paste it here, and I can just cast this as maybe string, a string, and then a string, right? So this is a blueprint of a category. When we talk of category in our app, this is what we call a category. And within this recipe categories provider, this particular provider is supposed to return as a list of recipe what category. So what we are going to do, if you are new to Riverpod, you just have to have patience and look at what I'm doing. I'll explain everything as I go on. So we are going to create a Riverpod, and if you have the Riverpod extension installed, this should be easy. So Riverpod generator future variable, this is what we are looking for. Now when I click on this suggestion, this is going to just create a future function that returns a future of something, and then it has this ref parameter, and like this is just like a boilerplate for future Riverpod provider, right? If that makes sense. So what we are going to do is that within this method, we want to return a list of recipe category. And we want to also call the name of our provider recipe category. So the recipe categories, and there is no need adding the name provider because Riverpod will automatically add the next name, which is provider, to all the providers that we create. So we can just leave it like this. So recipe categories, and we need to return a list of what? This. So for now, I'm just going to return an empty list here. Now let's fix our import. So I'm going to import this. Let's also import Riverpod. So at Riverpod, and I don't know why that's not working, but import package Riverpod annotation. So yeah, this is what you are looking for. And ref, let's import Riverpod. Right now, in order to get this working, we need to create a path variable. So there is the new way of writing Riverpod, which is much simpler. How this new Riverpod works is you write part of the code and Riverpod generates the boilerplate for you. So this looks complete, but then we need to add one more thing, which is where Riverpod is going to generate its code. And if you are a bit confused with this, just hold on a little bit. It's going to make a lot of sense very soon. So we will add one more thing, which is path, and then we are going to call it recipes, just the same name, right? So recipe categories provider.dat. Instead, we are going to add recipe categories provider.gen.dat. So this is going to represent a file that was generated by Riverpod. And that's how you just do it. It's much easier this way instead of writing the old Riverpod, which is a lot of boilerplate. Right? So this is all that we need to set up a provider. Right? Basically, something that can return us some sort of data. What we need to do is we need to call our API and then return the response. So I'm going to create a variable to hold the response of our API call. So I'm going to call it maybe final response, and then I'm going to set it to await dial, and dial refers to our a variable we created. So there's a variable we created, that's why I'm calling it by dial, which already has this base API endpoint. So dial, and then we want to do dial.get, and we need to append the last part of the URL. So if you look at this, it ends with /categories.php, right? And we need to add this to it because we already have the base URL set up. That means that any path we add over here is going to be appended to the base URL. So let's add / and then categories.php. Now when we get this response, we want to check if the response has a status code of 200, right? Because that's basically the response code you get if everything was successful. So if response the status code is not equal to 200, then it means something went wrong, right? And we want to handle this error. So instead of just returning maybe an empty list, we are going to rather throw the error, throw exception, and then response the status message. Now basically all that we are doing is that if the response from this API call is not 200, then we are just telling Riverpod, hey, we had an error, right? So tell whoever is calling this particular provider that they should handle that error, or they should see that particular error, and there is the message that we are passing to that particular exception, right? So if everything was okay, we didn't get a status code that's not equal to 200, so possibly we had 200, then what we want to do is that we want to get the data from the API, right? So I'm going to call final data is equal to response.data, and within this data, so if you look at the data that will be returned when we make this call, it is a JSON, or you can call it a map, right? So this is the actual data. Within it, there is a key called categories that contains the actual list of categories that we want. right? So this is the value we are looking for, this particular value for these key categories. So instead of just response.data, that is going to give us this big object. We don't want that. We want the value for the field categories. So we are going to access the categories field like this, and this is going to be dynamic because that doesn't know what this is, but we know what this is. So what we are going to do is that we are going to create a list from this, right? So we can basically do something like list dot from data, and that will try to convert this to a list. And when we have that list successfully, we can map this list, and for each category we can call our recipe category dot from JSON constructor. So basically we are saying that, hey, there is going to be an object or a map that looks like this. So ID category, STR category, blah 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 blah. Pass this data to our constructor recipe category dot from JSON, which is this, and this particular constructor knows what to do with this information in order to return us what? A recipe category class. So that's basically what we are doing. Then we can finally convert this back to a list, because if you use .map, it returns an iterable, not a list. So we can do to lists like this. And there's the actual data. There's the actual list of categories that we want to return. So let's rather return this. And now everywhere is okay except this particular file. In order to make Riverpod happy, we are going to use the build runner, which is the package we added. Build runner. So if we go to Perspec, we should see build runner somewhere here under dev dependency. So build runner, right? We'll use this build runner to generate this particular file. So open the terminal and then run this command. So that's run build underscore runner and then space watch. Now when we add watch, what it means is that you wouldn't have to run this command again. Anytime we create a Riverpod provider, it's going to automatically generate the additional necessary files, right? So let's run this. Good. So we see that the error is gone. It means that our recipes category provider can be used. Let's go to where we have our recipe category. There is where we have the actual widget, right? So instead of returning just this sizer box, let's view the separated, blah blah blah, what we are going to do is that we are going to call our provider, right? So I'm going to create maybe a variable call final categories equal to ref, right, dot watch recipes categories provider, and there is all that we need to do. So ref dot watch basically means that, hey, listen for when this recipe categories provider has anything for us. So whether it's an error, it's a loading state, it is data or whatsoever, just listen, right? Or watch, not listen, because when I say listen, it's a little bit confusing if you are used to Riverpod, but that's just the English term trying to explain it for you to understand. So watch this recipe categories provider. If it has anything for us, let us know. Right, so that is going to be within this categories. Now what we can do is that we can return, instead of this sizer box, we can return categories dots. So we have a lot of things over here, and the one thing I'm looking for is dot when. So dot when, not when data, but just dot when. So this allows us to define a list of widgets or a list of UI elements depending on the state that our categories are in. So when we have the actual data, when there is an error, we can show something, and when we are loading to maybe we can show a spinner, right? So when we have data, this is when we want to return the actual sizer box we copied, right? Because we only want to show this when there are actual list of categories that we can loop over, right? Now when there is an error, we can also show something. For now I'm just going to show a text which has error.toString in it, right? And when we are loading, we would like to show a spinner, circular progress indicator adaptive. I would like us to create a spinner widget because I would want us to style our spinner a little bit. So back here we can have a list of global widgets, and I'm just going to call that widget over here, and I'm going to create one called spinner, and this is going to be a stateless widget, so spinner, and it's going to return circular progress, so circular progress indicator. And my imports are not working well today. Yeah, .adaptive. Good. But one catch over here is that I'm going to put this particular spinner in a sizer box. So I want to constrain it and give it a height. So if I height of 20 and a width of 20. I want to also change the stroke width to like this. So basically what I'm doing is that I am changing the dimension of this particular indicator, right? Sometimes the Android indicator becomes very big, right, taking up the available space it can. So I want to constrain that, and I don't want to be repeating this particular code all the time. Also the width of the stroke width, which is just like the part of the circular progress indicator, looks big for me, and most of the time I think 2 is okay, right? But you can leave it the default way by not providing any stroke width. The default is I think 4. So let's come back here, and then instead of this circular progress indicator we can put a spinner widget here, which is what we just created, like this. Now there is nothing still showing here because we are not using the data we receive. So let's try to do something with data. Instead of item count, let's do data.length, and instead of maybe a text over here, let's do something like maybe access individual category. So category equal to data index, right? So this is going to give us each category as it loops over the list of category, and then we can have category.name here. So immediately I do that, we can see beef, chicken, dessert, lamb, blah blah blah, because we are fetching the data from this API, right? And then we are putting that particular name or value we are getting there. So this is what we have. Now let's also put our image within the card. Within the card.fill, we are going to have a cached network image. So child is going to be cached network image, cached network, and network imaged. If I try to, for some reason my imports are not working, so package cached network image like this, and then we can supply our image URL. So this needs something like image URL. I'm going to provide this image URL. Now we see we have our images here. We can see that some of our images are getting too close to the edges of the card if you look very carefully, like this first one. So what we are going to do is we are going to also wrap this in a padding widget to just provide some space within the card so that the images don't touch the edges of the card. So I'm going to wrap this in a padding widget and give it a padding of 4 instead of 8. not the card itself, but then the image. So I'm going to swap with child. What that is going to do is going to rather wrap it around the cache network image instead of the card itself, right? So the card looks big, but then the image is a bit small within it. So with this, what we are going to also add here while using the cache network image is a progress indicator builder. What it basically means is when we are loading the images, we want to show some kind of progress indicator. So progress indicator builder, and then we want to return our spinner, but then put in the center. So wrap with a center widget, and maybe wrap with widget center like this. Now let's hot restart, and we saw our spinner. So it looked like this, right, which isn't really good. So what we are going to do is that when we are loading, I would like to also put this spinner in the center. So wrap with widgets, where is that, and then put it in the center. So I can start again, and we can see the small stroke over there. So there is it. Then we get our list of categories, and the app is gone. So yeah, we need to hot restart again. Good. So this is what we have, right? And this fetching our categories. In the next part of this video, we'll be looking at how to fetch the other categories, how to navigate to a categories details page, how to search, right, because all these are not working for now, and how to also add items to favorites, just like I showed in the demo video. Now, if you have any questions, any concerns, please leave it in the comment section and I'll attend to them. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next part of this series.